Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Destiny Pharma plc investor presentation. Throughout this presentation, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged and can be submitted at any time via the Q&A tab situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. Just simply type in your question in the box and press send. The company will be able to then access those questions. The company may not be in a position to answer every question that it receives today, but it will publish responses where it is appropriate to do so. These will be available via your Investor Meet Company dashboard. I'd like to also remind you that this meeting is being recorded. Before we begin, we would like to submit the following poll, which should be in front of your screens shortly. We'd be very much appreciated if you could just give that to your kind attention. I'd now like to hand over to Neil Clark, CEO, and Sean Claydon, CFO of Destiny Pharma. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, and good morning to everyone who has joined this presentation, which is the standard investor presentation Destiny Pharma is currently using. And as you will see from the first slide, we are developing novel medicines that target the prevention of serious infections. We're listed on London AIM and have been since the autumn of 2017. Just take you through the disclaimer slide. And just obviously in terms of this meeting, Sean and myself are on the call, but we have an experienced board, including our founder, Dr. Bill Love, who founded Destiny Pharma 20 years ago. He's currently Chief Scientific Officer, but as you'd expect, we have a Chief Medical Officer and recently appointed Chief Business Officer and a strong board. So we believe in terms of management, more details on the website, but very well set up with all the capabilities you'd expect for an exciting clinical stage biotechnology company. And the board has been very good in setting a clear strategic goal, a 5-year plan to build a much bigger company in this area of infection prevention, obviously developing clinical assets which deliver the highest value, and building a world-leading anti-infection company. So we have a focus though. We focus on prevention. Prevention is better than cure, as we like to say. And we also like hospital care home markets, which are more focused in terms of a tailored sales force, and also in many cases better clarity on reimbursement, especially in America, and also tighter control. We have healthcare professionals delivering the drugs that we're looking to develop. We have 2 platforms now in the company. Those of you who have looked at our news in the last year will see that we, for the first time really, we added to our existing XF platform, which is Bill and the team's invention, which we've been developing, and have a clinical candidate which is just completing its phase 2 program in the XF pipeline. We've also added, though recently, these 2 new assets, NTCDM3 and the Sporkov collaboration, which are really in the world of the microbiome. So these are naturally occurring drugs which come from the sort of biotherapeutics, bacterial spore formulations, and we'll cover that later. So the company has expanded and has more depth and spread to its assets, which of course helps manage the risk and increases our opportunities. And as we've seen, we've expanded through basically in licensing and collaboration, and there could be more of that in the future. Though I think it's fair to say that 2021 is a year of delivery, and we're looking to make good progress from the current pipeline, but we can also be opportunistic about future expansion. And in terms of maximizing value, we at the moment are an R&D company, so collaborations through licensing are a key part of our strategy. We have one partner for China Medical Systems, but we're looking to add new partners this year, and you'll see recently we announced the appointment earlier in January of Dr. Stephanie Buick as our Chief Business Officer. So obviously we have a strong leadership there now for that strategic aim. And there are other opportunities to collaborate, research collaborations, grants. We've been very successful in winning grants as well. But the backdrop is, unfortunately, as we were reminded yesterday with, obviously very sort of tragic news of 100,000 deaths in the UK. COVID-19 has been really a sort of a harsh reminder of the importance of managing, preventing, and indeed treating infections, be they viral, like the coronavirus, or bacterial, and indeed fungal infections. And this backdrop has highlighted the lack of new products that can deliver effective preventative or indeed treatments to infections. And there's a read across from COVID infections, where many of the respiratory viral infections are also unfortunately associated with bacterial infections, which is the XF platform's target market. But I think it's increased awareness from governments and regulators, the importance of, from the healthcare point of view, but also from the economic point of view of preventing and managing infections. Every day a patient spends in a hospital costs thousands of dollars, thousands of pounds. And this has really helped us, we believe, in increased interest in what we're doing. We've always had a focus on antimicrobial resistance and the prevention of the growth of superbugs, and COVID has just highlighted that again. And there's been some action from governments, separate really to the pandemic. The UK government has recently taken a lead and selected 2 anti-infectives that it's almost sort of guaranteeing to buy a certain quantity each year for several years to really give a stronger commercial market opportunity for some of those anti-infective drugs, which include some of our approaches. Similar in the US has a Pasteur Act, which was again supporting commercial opportunities and returns. And in terms of funding, there's a really interesting new pharma-backed fund called the AMR Action Fund. $1 billion of cash has been put into this fund. It's looking to fund clinical development in this space. So we're in their sweet spot, and we'll see how we interact with them in 2021 as our pipeline develops. Also, you would have come across, I'm sure, in the news, the INEOS donation of £100 million, pardon me, to Oxford University to AMR research. So there's a backdrop here of a very obvious clinical need, but also government support and indeed increased interest in the commercial opportunity, which we believe is very clear for the programs that we're working on. So obviously, in terms of the summary at a glance, it's clear there's a global interest in what we're doing. As I said, a clear clinical need, but also very good commercial opportunities. We do want to make money and profits at the end of the day. And we have 2 late-stage assets, both of which are, really sort of have quite clear US opportunities. They're under IND in the US with the FDA, and both have fast-track status. So our lead asset from the XF program, XF73, we put this one first here in this presentation because we're coming up to some very exciting data at the end of Q1. We finished recruitment into our phase 2b study just at the end of December 2020, and we're now going through the process of really sort of collecting the data, cleaning it up, and then we will find out the results from that study at the end of Q1. We're expecting obviously that to be successful, and if it is, it will be move forward to be ready towards phase 3 studies, which hopefully we could start in 2022. So that's a really exciting development, pivotal stage for any drug development candidate, and we're very close to some key data. But also, we, as we said earlier, we bought in another asset in the second half of last year. In fact, it completed, I think, in early December. This is a program called NTCDM3, which was completed all that phase 2 work and is actually very more advanced and is ready to move again towards phase 3 studies. And that's something we'll cover later. But again, it's a preventative approach targeting this toxic bacteria strain, Clostridioides difficile, which can be in our guts and can cause some very nasty colon irritation infections leading to multiple episodes of diarrhea. So a real problem, especially in America, and indeed as is XF73, targeting the prevention of post-surgical infections, very clear clinical needs and great commercial opportunities. We also have an earlier pipeline, including a quite interesting government-backed or government-funded COVID-19 program with SporeGen called SporeCov, which we'll cover. And in terms of funding, with the acquisition of NTCDM3 in early December, we also topped up on our sort of working capital. So we're funded through to Q4 22, but what we don't have is the funds to actually start and carry out those phase 3 studies. So that's something that we're looking at, but that will come from a mixture of partnering, grant income, and potentially equity funding. So just being clear there on what our money covers, but we're still in a very, very strong position and in control of our destiny, as it were, for the next 2 years. And the pipeline slide, which looks a little bit small to me on the screen here, but hopefully you have a clear view there. It's also on our website of our pipeline. And as you'll see in green, we have our 2 biotherapeutic microbiome assets. As I said, these are the sort of naturally occurring bacterial formulations, which we're taking forward as potential new treatments. NTCDM3 is our most advanced program, as I said, is moving towards phase 3s. And this is the prevention of these recurrent C. difficile infections. XF73 nasal is the prevention of post-surgical Staphylococcal aureus infections. You may have heard of MRSA, which is methicillin-resistant Staph aureus. It's a certain strain, but this is still a major problem across the world It's the major cause of these post-surgical infections, and again, no approved products in the US, so an attractive opportunity. We also have a dermal infection program looking at ulcers associated with diabetes, diabetic foot ulcers, burns wounds, and then our Sporkov program. So it's really interesting for us, second half of last year, with the backdrop of COVID and obviously a sort of very tough environment for many businesses, that we managed to bring in our Sporkov collaboration. So we have a 50-50 collaboration there with Sporgen, a UK company, and we have 100% ownership of NTCDM3, and we've added those biotherapeutic assets to our very strong XF platform. So now, sorry for the pictures, but we're going in to just talk about XF73. And though it is relatively rare, unfortunately, if an infection does take hold after a major surgery, it can have quite dramatic consequences in terms of patient health and, of course, hospital costs. And it is poorly treated, as it were, in terms of prevention. So what we're looking to do is to prevent these infections. And the way this approach is that the infection is caused by this bacteria called Staph aureus, which is on us, in us, and in a day-to-day basis, we're happy, we're in a sort of symbiotic relationship and comfortable, but it's also opportunistic. And when you're cut open for an operation, it can actually effectively jump into the wound and, of course, cause these infections. And the main source of the Staph aureus that can lead to these post-surgical infections is, in fact, in our noses. And a third of the world is effectively a sort of high-level carrier of Staph aureus in the nose. And if you are, it's well established that you have a 10 times greater risk of these post-surgical infections. So best practice across the world in hospitals is to screen. So that's to test by a swab into the nose. Are you a carrier of Staph aureus? If you are, then you should be what's called decolonize, which is effectively looking to kill the vast majority of those bacteria in the nose before your surgery to reduce that risk of the post-surgical infection. And this sort of simple market model in the US alone is there's tens of millions of operations where we could effectively deliver our product and give us a market size, potential peak sales, we believe, of $1 billion. And that's at sensible pricing. This is not a product which we're looking to price at multi-thousands of dollars. We believe that sort of several $100s would be perhaps the maximum price. And if you think of a hospital in the US, especially, the cost of, say, a hip replacement could be $30,000, $40,000 as part of that overall cost package. An effective preventative decolonizing drug could fit very well into a market. And as I said before, there is currently no approved drug for this decolonization in the US. So XF73, which is what this drug is called, has real potential in a large market. It's novel. So one of its key attributes of the whole XF platform is that it does not seem to rise to resistance. Does not generate resistance. We're not generating more superbugs, and this, of course, is a key need for any new anti-infective antibiotic. And XF platform delivers this. And you'll recall at the start, a pharma company, when they set up this new investment vehicle to put money to work at clinical studies, has called it the AMR Action Fund. So addressing antimicrobial resistance needs to be a key component, we believe, of any new drugs in this space. We're targeting the hospitals. It's a very simple nasal gel, which we've developed, which is very safe. It doesn't get absorbed into the bloodstream, so it's a very targeted treatment. And we've had very good safety data announced in the middle of 2020 from the ongoing phase 2. We completed recruitment, and that data is coming up at the end of this quarter. So an exciting time ahead. There is in Europe, in UK, Japan, an old GSK antibiotic called mupirocin, which is used for this nasal decolonization. I describe it as a scruffy old drug. It has done a job, but it has several problems, one of which is that it has to be given 5 days in advance of surgery. So you'd be taking doses into the nose for 5 days of mupirocin, whereas XF73, because it's much faster, is just the day before. We also have better microbiology showing that we kill all strains. And remember, these bacteria do develop and morph. There are different strains across the world in different countries, indeed superbug strains. So far, XF73 has shown efficacy against all relevant strains. But one of the key claims, of course, is the resistance story. Mupirocin effectively is almost has a warning with it. It's known if it's used indiscriminately to lead to resistance build-up and the generation of, say, superbugs, whereas XF73 has this clear attribute of not leading to this resistance generation. Also, it's novel, of course. XF73 is new. We have great intellectual property position, no competition in our space, and innovation, as I said before, is what is needed to move on for some, in some cases, like mupirocin, some rather old antibiotics, which really have been around for sort of maybe 30, 40 years. This is a slide showing the resistance data. It's difficult perhaps to talk to this just on a webcast like this, but basically along the bottom line, you'll see the blue dots are XF73, and this is over time. So these are, it goes out to, on the bottom right, to 55 repeated exposures of, in this case, effectively a petri dish of MRSA is repeatedly exposed to the drugs, XF73, and the other lines on the chart are mupirocin and fusidic acid, which are two sort of old antibiotics. And over time, as the bacteria is repeatedly exposed to the drug, if you are seeing resistance, as the arrow shows, you effectively have to give more and more of your drug to try and achieve a sort of a 99% kill rate. You never kill every one of the bacteria. But with XF73, you see over these repeated exposures, you never have to increase the volume of XF73 needed to achieve that effective kill. And this is a classical microbiology study to demonstrate, in our case, the lack of resistance, and clearly differentiates us definitely from all old antibiotics and indeed many potential new treatments. So great data, which is published and in fact was peer reviewed effectively and reported on again by an Oxford University group in 2020. There's also, as ever in this space, separate publications. So there's a reference here to some 2019 papers, which are totally independent of Destiny Pharma, but on the left-hand side, there's a paper talking about the problem of mupirocin resistance in terms of treatment of Staph aureus, again an ongoing global problem. It's growing. The middle paper refers to a really interesting recommendation, really, from the US Cardiac Surgeon Society, saying that every patient going in for cardiac surgery should be decolonized in the nose. Staph aureus should effectively be removed, which of course is music to our ears. In this case, they're saying don't even bother to screen to see if somebody's a carrier. They're just saying all patients you should just decolonize because of the risk of post-surgical infection. So that's great. That's great news for us, and that sort of is part of the sort of backdrop to our justification for our market size. And on the right-hand side, there's a similar comments relating to the importance of decolonization from a group of Asian anti-infective specialists, including China and Japan. So showing that it is a global problem and is not just limited to the US market, albeit the US is still our key market initially. In terms of update with the program, obviously the phase 2 is going to announce results. We are very confident that they will be successful. And obviously then we will look to go back to the FDA to have discussions regarding the phase 3 design. So what we want to do in 2021, obviously, is to get the clarity with the XF73 program that we have with our M3 program in terms of understanding the size and scope of the phase 3 study. So there'll be more news on that after the phase 2 data later in 2021. And obviously then moving forward to completing those studies with one or more partners in place. And hopefully, obviously the ultimate goal is to register a new product in the US and to have that launched in a few years' time. And just a reminder again, in China, we have a China partner, China Medical Systems, who will take the lead and make any investment required to develop the China program. So now we come on to our second lead asset, which is our newest addition to the pipeline. This is NT-CD-M3, which is perhaps doesn't roll off the tongue, but NT stands for non-toxigenic and CD stands for Clostridioides difficile. So this is a non-toxic strain of the C. diff bacteria. And the problem with C. diff infections is that certain toxic strains, which are totally separate to NT-CD-M3, which if they're prevalent in the gut, especially the colon, they can lead to irritation and basically a major disruption of the lining of the colon and very sort of unpleasant multiple episodes of diarrhea and very weak patient. And it is in America still a serious issue. In fact, prior to COVID-19, it was listed as the major cause of hospital-acquired infections. I imagine, as we've seen in the UK, that COVID-19 has probably taken over there, where unfortunately people are picking up that infection in a hospital. But definitely, C. difficile infections hasn't gone away. There's approximately 500,000 cases that are reported each year in the US, and again, the patients who pick this up are mostly elderly in hospital wards or care homes. And there are 29,000 deaths a year in the US, which is actually the same number as die from prostate cancer. So it's a condition which is still required to be addressed. There are some products out there, but we believe NTCD M3 has a clear opportunity, and there's a very attractive market size. Unfortunately, again, driven by the number of patients who are suffering the deaths. We can see, I think, a very prudent peak sales opportunity of $200 million with our initial lead indication, but definitely the opportunity to expand that across the world and indeed into other markets, and a very good market opportunity. So the bacteria, the C. difficile bacteria, are found in us or in our environment, in the soil, and again, sort of non-toxic strains we can live with and don't cause too many problems, but they are very opportunistic. And one of the particular opportunities they like is when the gut microbiome is disrupted by the use of antibiotics. And remember, in hospital wards or care homes, patients may well be on or antibiotics for other conditions. And if their microbiome in the gut is disrupted, toxic strains, if they're present, will be opportunistic, and they will flourish. So they're very happily growing, but unfortunately, the side effect of their interaction with the gut lining is these multiple events of diarrhea. And also the other problem is this is a very infectious disease. So if you can imagine, diarrhea can get into, unfortunately, sort of door handles and onto and hands, and the outbreaks spread very quickly in hospital wards. So again, there's a read across the experience we've unfortunately had with the pandemic, with care homes and hospital wards, where cross infection is a real problem. So stopping the outbreak initially, of course, is a major goal in the management of C. difficile. The antibiotics can knock back the bacteria, the toxic strains, but some still survive. And of course, by giving antibiotics, you are of course giving them the opportunity to flourish again. So you have a high level of recurrence of the infection, say 25% recurrence, and then of that 25%, about 60% then have this multiple recurrence, and you can end up in a quite severe sort of death spiral of increasing infections and diarrhea and very sick patients, and of course the threat of an outbreak across the ward. And this spore, though, that the package that we've acquired, this is effectively a phase 2 package of another strain of C. difficile, NTCD M3, which is naturally occurring. So I think it's about 3% of the population have this in their guts, and it's non-toxic, so it's not causing any problems. And it was discovered by Professor Dale Girding, who's a Chicago-based medic, who's a world-leading expert in this whole area of C. difficile infection. So effectively, his life's work has been looking after patients and researching into patients of how to prevent and treat the C. diff infections when there's an outbreak. And what he discovered that there were certain patients in a hospital ward when there was an outbreak of toxic strains of C. difficile. There were certain patients who although they were perhaps elderly and frail, they didn't pick up the infection. They managed to go through an outbreak and not get the infection. And why was this? So through analysis of the patient's feces, he discovered that these patients actually had a different bacteria in their microbiome in the gut, and it was this strain NTCD M3. And what his thesis was, that this naturally occurring strain was actually acting as a protectant, and it was stopping the toxic strains from becoming predominant. So he did a whole series of experiments and research work. And actually what he did then was he licensed that whole package of work to an American biotech company called Virapharm, who are very successful. They then took it through phase 1, phase 2 studies. We estimate they spent at least $30 million and had very good data. And that's the package we've acquired. Virapharma, who and we've spoken to ex-Virapharma executives, were very excited by this program, but they also had other assets in their company which were focused on rare diseases and orphan drugs. And Virapharma got bought by Shire, a very large, well, it was UK, but I guess it's probably more of a US pharma company, which acquired them, I think, back in 2014 for a few $1 billion. but they bought Vera Pharma for their orphan drug portfolio. So this program, which had completed its phase 2 successfully, was actually then handed back to Professor Girding, and he then slowly started the process of looking to out-license the package to a new company, and that is where we came across him. And it took us 18 months to do the due diligence. We actually acquired the package, obviously, in November, December last year. So what I'm trying to say is it comes from world-leading science, but it's also had a very intensive investment from a very high-quality US biotech, and that's the package that we've acquired. And we own the global rights. The phase 2 data is very strong, as we said, and it's targeting a large market. And one of the key things that we did in our due diligence was that we obviously we had to review the existing data, but also we had to resolve some questions regarding the future in terms of the number and size of the phase 3 studies and also the manufacturing plans. We went with Professor Girding to the FDA in the summer of last year, and we had very good feedback. We have clarity now that it's one phase 3, and we also have clarity on what's required from the manufacturing, which is often challenging in drug development. You have to continually scale up your manufacturing as you progress through the clinical stages, and obviously you're heading towards phase 3. You're very much at the end game of clinical manufacturing. But we've resolved those issues. There are no issues, and that was why we were then ready to look with our investors, existing and hopefully new investors. We managed to close the deal in November, December last year with effectively a de-risked program heading towards phase 3, which is a great achievement. And the phase 2 data is very strong. I mean, the key takeaway here is that the rate of recurrence. So what the phase 2 study was in patients who'd had one episode of these C. diff infections, and as I said, the recurrence rates are normally very high. And this study was a comparator of NTCDM3 against placebo, and it showed that with NTCDM3 there was only 5% recurrence of the infection after the dosing with NTCDM3. So effectively what they're saying is that 95% of patients did not have a recurrent episode. As far as we can see, that's the best reported data from any candidate in this space in terms of reducing that rate of recurrence. It's very difficult to get it to zero, but this was very strong data, obviously statistically significant. It's been peer reviewed and published, and what we're looking to do is to effectively repeat that data in the planned phase 3. And as I said, the phase 3 has effectively been rubber stamped by the FDA as an outline plan. Obviously, we'll work now on the real detail, but the key thing here was to know the size, 800 patients, and the key endpoints, which are set out here. Again, we're going to be recruiting patients who've had that sort of first episode of C. diff infection, or maybe they had 2 episodes, and then we're looking to measure the effectiveness of NTCDM3 in stopping the recurrence of the infection. And what we're looking to do, of course, is to stop it in its tracks and for patients not to go into this spiral of repeated infections. And of course, by doing that, to limit the potential for cross infections. And Professor Girding, this is his life's work. His ultimate aim with this approach is to drive out the prevalence of C. difficile infection. As I said, in America, there's still 500,000 cases a year, and indeed there's many other countries, including UK, Europe, Japan, and a growing market in Asia, where the C. diff infection, the toxic strains, are a problem. So we believe that a study that we can run, and what we're doing in 2021 is doing a manufacturing tech transfer. We're beginning to finalise the fine detail of the phase 3 plan, also looking to talk to potential partners and grant bodies, and then we'll look to start the study in 2022. And yes, M3 is a breakthrough. We believe that the idea of it being a naturally occurring bacterial spore fits very much into a real sort of trend at the moment to look to try and harness the human microbiome for treatments. So this is something that 3% of the world has in their guts anyway. So it's very safe, and it doesn't disrupt the microbiome. It protects for the period of risk to effectively stop the toxic strain taking over. There are certain therapies which use, you may have heard of fecal matter transplants, whereby patients with healthy feces, you donate your feces, they are treated, effectively cleaned up, which is quite an expensive process. There's been concerns about could COVID-19 be in these healthy fecal samples and then introduced into hospital patients. But these therapies using fecal matter, whereby healthy microbiome, the healthy microbiome via the feces is effectively made into a pill, or in some cases an enema, is introduced to patients who are suffering from toxic strains of C. difficile. There is nervousness around the safety of these therapies because you're not quite sure what you're giving to the patient. So their use in America is limited, as in terms of the drugs that are in development that are fecal matter formulations, is limited to the very severe cases, almost the orphan drug patients who are having, multiple, over 3 episodes of recurrent diarrhea following a toxic infection. Our therapy is much more targeted because it's a single strain, but also we are a first-line therapy for that initial infection, though we believe that ours also could be used for the multiple infections as well to drive out the toxic strains of C. difficile. So there is some competition, but we believe that the M3 being safer and actually will be cheaper really does have a clear profile that it can be better than the competition that's there. Obviously, what we need to do is deliver that phase 3 data from the planned studies. So that's covered our 2 main clinical programs, which of course are the key drivers of the value, and we believe are high quality and very focused. We also have an earlier pipeline, and here's a slide here on our SporeCov collaboration. It's a research collaboration with the company SporeGen. So this is their invention, as it were. So we have a joint share with them, 50-50 partnership on the development of SporeCov as a nasal spray. And the idea is that you would take it at a period of risk. It could be an outbreak of COVID-19 or indeed influenza. And a simple nasal spray, very safe, would be taken each day in the morning, and it stimulates the innate immune system, which of course is how the virus is getting into our bodies through the mouth and the nose, and prevents these coronaviruses from obviously taking hold in the body. So it's a first-line therapy to stimulate the innate immune system. It could sit alongside vaccine approaches or potentially be instead of them. Obviously, we'll have to see where the data goes. But it comes from work Professor Cutting at SporeGen has done in influenza, where he's had great response from the sort of specific formulation we have here of SporeCov of the bacteria called Bacillus. And we're looking now to test that through models in influenza, but also new COVID-19 models. We're working with the University of Liverpool, and it's funded. The work is funded by the UK government through its Innovate UK arm, and that £800,000 grant was awarded last September. I think we announced this. And over the next 18 months, we'll test it through influenza and COVID models, we'll do some toxicology work, but we're aiming to come out of this work with a product which is ready to go into humans. So it's obviously it gets perhaps a lot of attention because it's related to COVID-19. It's a very safe, low-cost, stable product that could sit alongside vaccine approaches or indeed be used separately and could be distributed throughout the world. So interesting program, more news to come on that later in the year, as indeed there will be more news to come from our earlier XF assets, where again we've announced since the IPO over £2.5 million worth of grant funding. And again, we're working on potential new indications here with UK and Chinese universities, medical schools regarding the XF potential for prevention of dermal, ocular, oral and respiratory infections. So we'll see how that work goes. And again, more news expected in this year in 2021. And our aim here is to bring forward another clinical candidate from the XF platform to take into the clinic and into the next few years. But obviously our main focus in terms of funding and activity is going to be on our current clinical assets in this year. We talked about our strategy for commercialization. At the moment, Destiny Pharma does not set out to have our own sales force in Europe or America to sell our products. Our strategy is to find partners who will lead that commercialization. That strategy could change in the future, but at the moment, we've said very clearly that we're looking to find partners for our assets, and obviously our lead assets, XS73 nasal gel, and NT-CDM3 for the prevention of recurrent C. difficile infections are our lead assets, and obviously will be the ones that we're spending most time on. Obviously, Stephanie's joined us now as Chief Business Officer, but we're also looking at collaborations for earlier partnerships, as we've shown with SporeGen. We're open to collaborate on those research programs. We have obviously one partner already, as I've said before, China Medical Systems, who are a Hong Kong listed Chinese specialty pharma company, and part of their business model is to make investments and to take China rights with the UK and US biotechs and medtech companies. They have quite a few of these arrangements, and any money that needs to be invested in China, they will make, and we have a very good relationship with them. And obviously, they're waiting for the phase 2 data from XO73, and hopefully they will then, obviously with us, look at that data and begin to take that forward in China. But we will see. They obviously invested again in our funding last November. I think they put in an additional £2 million, so I think slightly increased their stake. So they've been very supportive. And so we have our partner in China. And obviously what we want to do is to find more partners in different territories, as we said, for our 2 main assets especially. So that's a key target for 2021. And that comes through on the news flow slide. Obviously, we ended 2020 in great shape with our Sporkov collaboration, our NT-CDM3 acquisition, and also our financing. And now as we start 2021, we've got the excitement of really important results from the XO73 phase 2 coming at the end of Q1. Which will then lead to the finalisation of the plans for the phase 3 for that, and then looking to start that study in 22. And we'll make further progress with NT-CDM3. We obviously have the funding for that following our financing, so we're pushing ahead there. And as I said, partnering deals is another thing that we're setting out to do. And we'll obviously, first half of the year, we'll be building those relationships and progressing discussions we have, which from last year, but definitely towards the end of the year, we'll be looking to close at least one deal there, I'm sure. And then into 2022, it's around starting studies and developing other activities. So really well placed, we believe, with some chunky news flow. And of course, we with our overall aim of building a bigger company, there will be other opportunities to bring in other assets to strengthen the portfolio further. But as I said, 2021, I think, is probably a year of delivery from the current pipeline and maybe expansion, perhaps more in 2022 rather than this year. But we shall see. And then in terms of a summary, hopefully it's come across, we do want to build a larger company in this space. It's clear to us, and has been for many years, we're perhaps ahead of the curve, that infection prevention is an unmet need. There's been a lack of investment from pharma companies in this space. And it's clear to us that the market opportunity and the clinical need is made more aware than ever by the pandemic and the threat of antimicrobial resistance to superbugs. And we're really well placed to take advantage of that with our lead assets, NT-CDM3, and obviously XO73 with that data coming at the end of Q1. We think we've really strengthened the pipeline with some sensible diversity, managing the risk, but also adding value. And we're in a decent place with the funding. Our basic working capital were funded through to the end of or back end of 2022, and really have a clear positioning that prevention is better than cure, and with some good news flow coming up. I think we're very well placed as a UK biotech to push ahead, and we've made a good start to 2021, and very excited about the year ahead.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. Neil, you said you'd have that in 40 minutes and you're a couple of minutes shy, so thank you for that. Ladies and gentlemen, please do continue to submit your questions using the Q&A tab situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. But just while the company take a few moments to review those investor questions submitted today, I'd like to remind you that a recording of this presentation, along with a copy of the slides and the published Q&A, can be accessed via your Investor Meet company dashboard, and you'll receive an email notification telling you that they're ready for you to view. I'd also like to remind you that your feedback is important to the company. Immediately after the presentation has ended, you'll be redirected for the opportunity to provide your feedback in order that the company can better understand your views and expectations, and would very much welcome you to spend a few moments to provide the company with your views and expectations. Neil, Sean, obviously investors had the ability to pre-submit questions, and in addition, obviously the Q&A tab is quite jammed with questions, but perhaps I could start with the two that we received ahead of the event. The question reads: there is a strong need for COVID prevention now across the globe, and Destiny are well placed. Are Destiny and SporeGen considering how to accelerate the testing and potential rollout of the nasal spray solution via fast track to get the product quickly into the global public ahead of 2022?
Thank you for the question. Yes. Having said that, I think we need to be careful. This is it's a preclinical program, and obviously we have to go through the work that's set out under the grant, as I said, which is working through animal models in influenza and COVID-19, and then some toxicology to check safety of the sort of formulation. Which again, the backdrop of it is that we expect it to be very safe. But I think it is a good question. It's something we discussed. We actually had a steering committee meeting this week with our collaborators at Sporgen of just looking ahead to the longer game in terms of if you're expecting success as we'd enter 2022, what would be the next steps? And as you can see in the environment, COVID-19 has been some incredible acceleration, I think carefully managed of vaccines. Obviously, patient safety is critical. But definitely, we will. Obviously, we're very interested in accelerating research and drug development, but it has to be done under sort of the auspices of the regulators and safety. But there's also, there's an international opportunity here in terms of different countries have sometimes different approaches to approvals of, and it may be that there could be a faster track approach, say in the US or Asia compared to the UK. So we're open to that. But definitely with our, obviously, Innovate UK, effectively the UK government providing that support, one of our key discussions will be with them in terms of future support, and also what acceleration is possible in terms of, like I say, fast track status. It'd be very interesting to see how it develops. I mean, COVID-19 has been an incredible environment for approvals and regulators across the world in terms of the speed they're reacting, and will that slow down and they'll take a breather, or has that actually generated some new approaches? Because obviously it's very frustrating sometimes for everybody how sometimes the pace of progress is slow through drug development. But of course, most of that is driven through safety. Is really, you have to be very, very careful about rushing things. But yes, we'd hope the nature of the program being very safe, stable, bacterial sort of natural formulation, that it lends itself very much to speed, and fast track status would be great. So we'll have those discussions, and it's obviously something we'll be very interested in.
Thank you very much indeed, Neil. And the other question that we received, looking forwards and assuming all goes well with the final clinical trials, could you please discuss your strategies for the monetization of XF73?
Yes, well, I think I touched on that in the presentation. So, a fairly classical biotechnology company model is obviously to partner with a larger company who, obviously, when you do those deals, they will pay cash up front to access your asset, and then you would have a carry interest on them taking it forward and hopefully selling the product on the market, and you have a royalty carriage. So you have as they sell products, you have 10% of that revenue would come back to Destiny Pharma as the sort of the owner of the original project. There are, of course, different options. As I said, we could decide in the future. I said it's not our current story to say we will keep hold of European rights for all our platform, and then we will set up a European sales force, and obviously we'd sell it ourselves and capture more of the margin. It's that is the way to build a bigger company, of course, is to keep hold of the assets for longer, and to, if you can, is to eventually sell them yourselves, and you will keep more of the margin. If you partner, of course, you have to give away some of the upside. So there's I'd say that the story at the moment is very much that we're looking to find partners, as we've done with China Medical Systems. These partners have the expertise, the cash, not only to help with the late stage drug development, but also for that commercialization and sort of monetization. And the ultimate value is driven, of course, by a successful product. Long-term sales into a market is where you can generate the huge upside from the investment required in drug development. So we have a sort of certain flexibility to our outlook, but definitely at the moment partnering is one of the key aims for 2021.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. Could I ask you just to click on the Q&A tab, just so you can see the questions, and obviously, hopefully you can view those. Could I ask you possibly, please, if it's possible, just to read out the questions, and where appropriate, give a response, and I'll track you down to the bottom, and then I'll take the floor back from you after that, if that's okay.
Okay, so Simon C, NASDAQ question. it's something that's discussed, but I think that something is discussed by almost every UK biotech, AIM-listed biotech at the moment. There's been some, it's an increasing trend for companies to look across at NASDAQ. See companies like Mereo, Summit that have moved across. It's not straightforward. I've actually been involved in when we acquired a company from NASDAQ many years ago, and it's challenging in terms of sometimes the preparation required to meet the requirements and managing 2 listings, but also I think the simple fact of being bigger as well. I mean, people talk about having a market cap of $250 million before you go onto NASDAQ, and you'll still be seen as small. So it's definitely something that's looked at, and at the right time in the future. Definitely with our US focus and our expertise, Sean's expertise and the rest of the board, we could definitely manage that process. But also, I think we'd like to think that AIM could support us on the journey as well in the short term. So we're obviously interested in talking to US investors, and if there is a stronger push towards NASDAQ, that's something we could definitely look at. But I think for this year, again, it's more a matter of delivering to our current shareholders via AIM and see where the market cap goes. But definitely down the track, it's something that we can look at. And obviously, yes, Stephanie has some experience from coming from Summit Therapeutics, but we also have broader experience on the board as well.
Neil, would it be possible, because obviously investors can't see the questions, if I could just ask you to read the question out as well, just to put the response. Okay. No, my apologies, I should have been clearer, but
okay, well, that'd be great. Basically, what's our view on NASDAQ? So I think hopefully we came across. So the next question from Tim G is, has the new UK initiative to support hospitals in purchasing novel anti-infective agents resulted in any novel anti-infectious agents being identified for purchase? Will it cover all anti-infectives, antibacterials, antifungals, antivirals? Good question. They have selected the first 2 anti-infective agents which will go into this program, which is a program which is, I think, it's the first in the world. The UK government, I guess it's really effectively the NHS, is basically going to guarantee to purchase, and I don't know the exact amounts, but I'm assuming it'd be sort of a certain number, a multi-million pounds worth of 2 drugs from 2 different companies to basically guarantee those sales. And this is a way of improving the commercial endgame for anti-infectives, which I must say it's not something necessarily that we think our drugs are focused on. We like prevention, where we believe there'll be wider uptake of our drugs, but definitely for some sort of the classical, perhaps antibiotic companies, there's been a struggle to get their drugs used because they can't necessarily get traction because of cheap generic pricing. But the 2 drugs have been selected. One is a Shionogi antibiotic. I apologize, I can't remember the names, but the 2 have been selected. It's public. It's on government GovUK websites, and I don't know if it covers antifungals and antivirals. I think again, obviously in terms of coronaviruses, of course, there's a totally different environment for support there. But definitely antifungals is an interesting area where there's a need as well. But definitely the reason for this program was definitely around sort of antibacterials initially, but have to look at the detail to see whether it spreads across to antifungals, antivirals. So the next question, also from Tim G. If you get approval for XS73 for use in surgical procedures, are you likely to initiate additional clinical programs to obtain approval for additional indications? Yes, there are other opportunities. One of which is when there's been an outbreak of a staph infection. So this is perhaps more as a treatment rather prevention prior to surgery. You do get outbreaks not only in hospitals, but actually we know we've had discussions in the US military when they have recruits coming in for training camps. They can get outbreaks of staph infections, and it leads to high numbers of dropouts. So there's actually been some quite large studies done in the US Army to try and reduce the level of staphylococcal infections, and nasal decolonization is one way to do this. So there are other opportunities, but very much at the moment, we're clear that the areas we're focused on with the nasal gel, and there's in some ways there's more than enough for us to go for with our current programs and the target markets. And then another question from Tim G regarding development of XS73 and the discontinuation of mipiricin Bactroban, which is the nasal formulation in the US. What is the risk of generic versions now appearing or a competitor buying the rights to Bactroban from GSK in the US and then relaunching it? Yes, it's a good question. I guess it could be acquired and relaunched, though our understanding is, again, because it's a mupirocin formulation, and mupirocin is, we believe, increasingly becoming out of fashion because of the problems with resistance and its actual utility as a treatment. Be interesting to see if it does reappear. And generic versions, well, there are effectively generic versions, albeit nothing is approved in the US. So in the US, there is no approved drug for the nasal decolonization of Staph aureus prior to surgery. The nasal versions of Bactroban, my understanding is, were used more for when there was outbreaks. But something that we're tracking, and actually with Stephanie Buick now on board, we will be doing further market analysis in the US of exactly this type of issue, in terms of really getting into the nitty-gritty again of what's happening in the market regarding use of mupirocin, Bactroban, competitors, pricing, and really talking to anti-infective medics, pharmacists, sort of accountants at hospitals in the US to understand how the market's developing. But we're pretty confident that still a very clear opportunity for XF73 regardless. A question from Tim M. Will you need to raise funds for the M3 phase 3 trials, or is that already in existing cash? I think we said that, yes, we would need, there will be funding required for the M3 phase 3, which is, we want to start in 2022. And as I said, that will come from a combination of partnering, there's grant opportunities, or potentially alongside that and equity funding, but there's no plans for that in 2021. Obviously, as I said, partnering is one of the key aims this year, but also we will be talking to grant bodies, and there have been some very large grants awarded in this space, especially in the C. difficile space. Tens of millions of dollars have been awarded to companies in clinical studies. Mark C asked, why is the C. difficile trial for M3 not starting until 2022? Well, the project effectively was on hold for a few years. It got handed back to Professor Girding from Shire when they acquired Pharma, and obviously we've managed to negotiate and restart the program. But as part of that initial restarting the program, we're having to set up new manufacturing basically at a more advanced facility that can cope with phase 3. It's a specialized biotherapeutic supplier in the States, and that will take the rest of this year. So until we've done that process, we can't obviously have the clinical trial material needed to start the clinical study. So that's why it's delayed, not delayed as it were. It will take that long until 2022. And that's not unusual in any manufacturing process transfer. It takes a long time to set up new systems, and also to do the test runs to make sure it's all being run, of course, to the highest standards possible. Does the NT question here, Tim G, does the NT-CDM3 formulation comprise of any live bacteria? Well, it's a live bacterial spore. And he also asked, do we envisage any problems with long-term viability? No, it's proven to be very stable. It's one of the things, of course, in our due diligence, the program's been run through to phase 2. So there's over a decade. So there's great stability data for that period. And I think in terms of shelf life, he asks, I mean, normal storage conditions, I think it's stable at room temperature, but having said that, it may well be that it's kept in a simple fridge, which is not unusual, but it will have a very good shelf life. Whether it's 3 years or not, I couldn't say, I'm afraid, I don't know, but definitely it'll be very stable and not stored in sort of super cold temperatures or anything like that. That's one of its great attributes. In the previous phase 1 and phase 2 study, it was delivered as a simple solution in water of the spores in water. One of the things we're doing this year is improving that and actually freeze drying effectively. I think it's freeze drying that process. So we'll have a tablet. So of course your stability then is even greater. So we're not concerned at all about stability or indeed cost of goods, which is another key advantage of our approach to compare to some others in this space. Then Tim G also asks, this is quite detailed, what sort of assay specs and methods will you be proposing for stability testing and routine quality control for NT-CDM3? And how do you ensure that there is no contamination with harmful strains at C. difficile? Well, I'm afraid that I can't answer all of that, but that's all managed as part of high standards of analytics and drug development and research. And in terms of contamination, yes, there'll be a huge amount of sampling done to assure, obviously, that when we think we've got NTCD-M3 in a sample, it will be NTCD-M3. But remember that in terms of its NTCD-M3 is non-toxigenic, so it can't contaminate. But if the toxic strains is there, obviously that will be picked up in the analysis. But I think maybe the question is a little bit too complicated for this call. If you want to follow up, Tim, I can introduce you to maybe one of our microbiologists, and he can talk in more detail. But we know it, there won't be any challenges in this approach. It will all be done to the highest standards with expert analytical processes. And then Tim G also asks, are there any royalties or development milestones to pay to third parties for either of your two main clinical assets or on any earlier stage assets? So for M3, obviously we have we've acquired the asset from Professor Dale Girding, so we paid him $3 million up front, and there's success-based milestones and longer-term royalties to go to him if they're successful, but we're very happy with the deal we've struck there. For XS73, there are no carried interests. We own the asset. Obviously, China Medical Systems have China rights, but if they're successful in China, we actually have a carried interest on any success they have. And indeed, for the earlier assets, SporeCov is a 50-50 collaboration with SporeGen, so we share that equally in terms of any upside there. And then, of course, we don't have any other partnerships on the other assets. So the XF platform, it was invented and discovered by Destiny Pharma. So it wasn't in licensed from a pharma company or a university. So it's a very clean asset in that respect. That obviously the company owns all of the upside unless and when we strike partnerships. Suresh asks, when we quote market sales, market size numbers, is this always per annum or over time? Per annum. I think that's correct to say, yeah, per annum. Peak sales, obviously, classically, when you launch a product, when you do the modeling, you assume sort of 5 years to peak sales. It can be fairly slow to start and then accelerate. So you have a peak sales, you get that for a few years. Obviously, then it tails off as you sort of usually assume there's some sort of generic competition. So normally, perhaps give yourself a decade of maybe peak sales, maybe perhaps a bit high, but that's the modeling. But definitely, it's the numbers in this presentation are talking around peak sales or market sizes per year. Peter asks, when do you expect to come to a determination to read the next round of financing? Well, I think we're later in 2021 as we head into 2022. Obviously, we want to have the financing to really sort of plan starting those clinical studies. So it's something that we'll look at later in the year, but we do have a strong cash position, so we're not under any pressure there. Obviously, the combination of partnering, grant funding, and equity in 2022 will help us to carry out the phase 3 studies, and we could be in the exciting position of having 2 phase 3 studies to run. So obviously, the money adds up, but that's a fantastic place to be as a biotechnology company. David has asked, is the long-term intention that XS73 nasal becomes routine for any major surgery to prevent the jump from the nose to the open wound? Yes, that would be our. We'd have a very, very successful project and a very, very valuable company if that was to happen. But also, if it's the smaller market where it's only patients who have carriers in the nose, that's still a massive market, as we've indicated in our presentation. But definitely, as that paper from the US cardiac surgeon said, for cardiac surgeries, they're recommending that don't bother to screen if a patient's a carrier, just give it to all patients, especially if it's a relatively low cost, simple to use treatment like ours is. So there's definitely opportunities for that wider use. We do assume, sensible market penetrations and take-ups in our market models we've indicated here. And it says also, he also asked, would that be for all major surgery or only for the third that are identified as carrying SA? So as I said, we assume the third, but definitely it could extend into all patients in certain categories, depending on obviously, I guess, how XF73 performs in the market. This is what happens as a drug is launched. You get that real world data, and we'd be confident that there'd be increased uptake because we'd be delivering a very safe product, addresses antimicrobial resistance, that's relatively low cost and doing what it says on the tin, which is decolonizing the nose prior to surgery. So why wouldn't it be used more widely? David asks, Are there any difficulties with storage, distribution, application of XF73 nasal gel? No, it's a stable gel. And how long does the application take? Well, to be honest, it's a little squeeze into the nose and you rub the nares. It's a matter of seconds to a minute, as it were. Very simple. Can be administered by a nurse, or indeed self-administered under sort of care of a nurse. Very easy, non-irritant, and we've had, I said, from the phase 2, we've had very good feedback on its ease of use from clinicians and hospitals today. We'll find out more from the clinical data, of course. Peter asks, you describe XF as a platform. Could we say more about that and why it can produce a series of drugs? Well, it goes back to the history of Bill Love's work and the chemistry, discovering a sort of the XF compounds, and a platform basically means that you have a series of structures, and certain examples of those are taken forward as drugs, perhaps the ones that perform best. Maybe they're more soluble, or they have certain attributes you think make them better. So XF73 is one of those. That implies that we've had more than 73 discrete compounds on the platform, which is true. Some of those have fallen by the wayside, but we also have others such as XF70 and DPD207. So this is what happens when you have almost like you're mining a seam, of gold, as it were, and certain compounds are taken further forward through the many years of development and become your lead compounds. So we've got certain backup compounds that we're looking at in those research programs. David M asks, how is NTCD administered? Well, it's been a simple drink of the spores in a solution in studies to date, and we're looking to just amend that to go to a tablet. So we've got a freeze-dried tablet, so tablet with a glass of the water each morning. Very, very easy, very straightforward to use, very stable. Another question here from Tom B. NTCDM3 phase 3 trials cost approximately 10 million. I don't know where the 10 comes from, because we believe it'd be closer to 25 to 30 million for the total phase 3 study. And next, he asked the question, can we expect phase 3 for XF73 to cost about the same amount? Yes, I think broadly speaking at the moment, that would be a sensible assumption. We'll find out more later this year on XF73. Obviously, we're going to get hopefully good phase 2 data. We can then have a more detailed discussion with the FDA, and we'll clarify the size of that phase 3 study. So what we're hoping to do with XF73 is to basically move that forward in the next 6 months. So we're at the same stage with XF73 that we are with M3 in terms of knowing the exact numbers of the phase 3 that's planned to start in 2022, and obviously the implications for the funding requirements. Tom B asks, regarding commercial partnerships, have we had any discussions with partners in the US and Europe? Yes, early stage, but we've had some good discussions. People have been in the data room, but obviously phase 2 data is key to this now in terms of people are waiting for the phase 2 data. The quality of that data will drive the next set of discussions. And Douglas asks, are there opportunities being explored on the M&A side, Oxford Uni, or interested in Destiny from larger farmers? Obviously, we're a listed company. The board always open in terms of anyone was to approach the company. We'd look at that and take it seriously if that happened. But as I said, I think this year is a matter on the in-licensing or M&A side. We've done some deals last year. It's more about delivering this year. But obviously, we'll be opportunistic as we have been in the past. But I think we've got a lot in our pipeline that we can drive forward ourselves to increase our own value while interacting with other partners.
No, I think that probably does it. I think the final question from Tom, I think you've just touched in as he talks about being a target of takeover by a larger pharma. So I think that final question probably addresses that. And thank you firstly to investors for submitting the questions, and thank you for being so diligent and taking the time to answer all those that have been submitted. It probably makes sense for me just to jump in, and if we do get any questions that come in after, Neil, Sean, I can make those available to you. But perhaps before I divert investors to give feedback, which I know is important to you, perhaps I could just ask you to wrap up, and that would be great. Thank you.
Thanks for the questions. Obviously, you can find us via our own website or as well if there's any specific questions. But in summary, we have a clear goal: infection prevention. We're in a great position with a strong pipeline. Our funding position is good, and we've got the excitement of data around the corner. So I think everything to play for. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed to both Neil and to Sean. Could I please ask investors not to close this session, as you'll now be automatically redirected for the opportunity to provide your feedback. If you access this meeting from our website, then the feedback page will automatically appear. If you access via the link sent to you by email, you're just simply asked to be logged in to provide your feedback. But it is incredibly important if you could give the company your views and expectations. On behalf of the management team of Destiny Pharma, we'd like to thank you for attending today's presentation. That now concludes today's session, and good afternoon to you all. Thank you once again.